See, if the God of the universe created you and I with a purpose, then it would only make sense that he would want to somehow or some way communicate with us. So maybe God revealed himself to a select group of people and inspired them to write everything down.
All right, let's talk about a year that will live in infamy. 1953. Let's talk about the Stanley Miller Experiment. This was a huge experiment, and people thought, what?
Right.
This was it. Go ahead and go ahead and talk about the Stanley Miller Experiment.
It was actually the Miller-Urey experiment. Harold Urey was a Nobel Prize winner. He was also Stanley Miller's teacher, his professor. And what they did is, in a nutshell, is a really, really highly controlled experiment that they sparked into this thing, and they produced some amino acids. They didn't produce life in a test tube like it's presented, life in a laboratory or whatever. They produced some amino acids that form. Problem is they showed up left-handed and right-handed, and they destroyed each other instantaneously. So they really it didn't work, but it worked in their minds long enough to realize that, okay, yes, we did something, so we're going to call it. And that concept has just ballooned into this. They created life in a test tube type of thing, which is it's just not true. And again, because you can take some chemical. Where did the stuff come from in the first place? That had to be that. Where did the spark come from in the first place? That doesn't mean that okay, they want to say that's what happened out in a slime pit somewhere and a lightning bolt hit it. Well, where did all that come from? Even if they did that, and even if it did produce something that was viable and believable and all that, whatever, good, whatever, however you want to term it.
If a scientist,
where'd it come from?
If a scientist were able to create life in a lab, would you believe in evolution?
No, it means it takes intelligence to produce life.
Bingo.
It means it doesn't mean
there was a creator
accidentally. It means somebody did this.
Right. It took information, and it took a creator, a designer to put it together.
Yeah. All they do when they do stuff like that is just push the question back. The old phrase begs the question. It just pushes the question back. Okay, well then, where did that part come from? That's why the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life, Charlie's book title, he never talks about origin, because they can't talk about origin, because it's impossible. All it does is push the question back. Even if it was the Big Bang, go all the way back to there. Where did the stuff come from for the Big Bang? I mean, no matter where you push the thing back, they can back time out to infinity if they want to. There's still not enough time. There's still going to always be that unanswered question. Where did it start?
So at the end of the Miller experiment, what was formed again? What was created? Was it
just a handful of amino acids?
Okay. Now, what does it take to go from amino acids to the simplest form of life?
To a self-replicating cell.
Right.
It takes quite a leap, actually.
Right.
And that's the thing. They'll say that's how they say evolution happened. They say the first self-replicating cell evolved. What does that mean? And where did that come from? And what does that mean? And even if it's self-replicated, okay, it's self-replicated, and so now we have some creature. Well, what good does a creature do if it's a boy and there's no girl?
Right.
So now we got to have this thing happen twice.
Yep. What are the odds?
Yeah, it's just that, but that's what they say, which it's all just so, it's a fairy tale. I showed in one of our services, last night, as a matter of fact, science fiction is highly imaginative fiction, typically involving some actual or projected scientific phenomena. And that is exactly what that stuff is. It is science fiction. It's not science, because you can't do it, you can't observe it. But yet they say these first simple self-replicating cells formed, which it's illogical.
I heard Christian apologists compare an amino acid to a cell. It would be like comparing a brick to the city of Chicago.
Humongous group of buildings, absolutely. There is no comparison, but we have amino acids that we need even, and they're required for life and all that. So that's their justification. Well, it's a building block. Okay, fine. Built on what, into what, and how? I mean, there's no mechanism for that.
40 years after the Stanley Miller experiment, this is what he says. The problem of the origin of life has turned out to be much more difficult than I and most other people envisioned.
Absolutely.
In fact, I think all scientists today, in the present day, think that his experiment was actually pretty laughable nowadays. In fact, there was a evolutionary biologist, Massimo Pigliucci. He said this: unfortunately, Miller-type experiments have not progressed much further than their original prototype, leaving us with a sour aftertaste from the primordial soup.
And that is a very important point and a very important statement, and it's so true. And the problem is, anybody that's alive today that's above 20 years old understands technology. You mentioned iPhone, iPad, iPhone, iWatch, and technology advances so rapidly, but it doesn't do it on its own. Man does it. Mm-hmm. Intelligence does that stuff. Intelligence is what develops things into different things and more complicated and all that kind of thing. You would think with the technology available today, if they could do that, they could do that. Mm-hmm. If they really did something back in the early mid 50s, then they
by now
certainly
they should be able
to just, it should be so commonplace. It's ridiculous now.
Is the Stanley Miller experiment, is that still in our textbooks today?
Oh yes, it's still in every one of them. They got nice, pretty drawings, and it's still taught. Despite
trying from 1953 to now, scientists cannot spark life from chemicals or dead matter. What would it take? This is my favorite atheist, Richard Dawkins. He was asked, how did life spark into existence? You know what his answer was? This is awesome. We got lucky, and then evolution took over.
It's funny. I got a couple of clips of Richard Dawkins that are, one of them's kind of funny. He's being interviewed and about intelligent design, and he goes on talking about how we don't know where life comes from, we don't know how it started, and so the interviewer asks, well, is it possible that intelligent design is factored in? And Richard Dawkins says, it could be, but if it is, it would have to be from an intelligent source out there somewhere that sort of evolved by some kind of Darwinian means.
Yeah.
And it's just...
That was a Ben Stein interview.
Seriously, right.
Yeah.
Right. But here's something else about Richard Dawkins. I show Scientific American is one of the publications I've subscribed to forever. And every year, 2, 3, 4 times a year, it's a little different every year, but they run a full-page article ad that lists shows just faces of various scientists. Yesteryear, Darwin and Madame Curie, and all the way to current time, Richard Dawkins is one of them on there. And it says, what do these scientists have in common? They have rejected the supernatural. They have worked to improve this world. And there's a page right across the whole bottom of that statement, across the whole page, it says 93% of elite scientists reject belief in personal God. And I asked the question, I show that, and I asked the question, if 93% of the elite scientists reject God, and they are working to improve this world, what are they doing? And who are they doing it to? And how are they doing? And it goes back to those questions you asked early on. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where do morals come from? Where are we going? Those types of questions are being answered by people that reject God. That's sobering when you stop and realize the consequences of that kind of a mindset and a kind of a philosophy. And that's the mindset that's in all the textbooks that our children are using. And we wonder where the problem came in. Why is my child going south, or whatever? What's going on? And the parents don't really know because they think they're doing the right thing. And they're doing the best they can, what they know to do. But I'm telling you, we've got to get involved in our own children's lives. It matters.
In 2019, is the theory of evolution in trouble?
I've subscribed to many science publications, many of them, and have for years. They admit in them all the time they don't have a clue. Mm-hmm. And what they're learning now is causing them to rethink what they thought they knew. And there are all kinds of examples of how we don't have a clue. The problem is most people don't get science subscriptions to science publications. Most people don't go to science symposiums. They don't know this stuff. They're left with the fact that's presented. And then there are some very, very charismatic people on YouTube and on various interviews and things that are convincing people that science is all this. I'm not opposed to science. I love science. We do science experiments at our meetings. But evolution has nothing to do with science. So the problem is, in real life, yes, evolution's in trouble, and they know it. But like you've read some quotes, they've always known it from the start. Ernst Haeckel knew he faked the pictures, but yet it was believed by so many, even still in books today. And so the people that are doing this, yeah, they know they've got a lot of trouble. But it's still being presented as though it's a fact.
Here's a quote from an atheist philosopher, Thomas Nagel. He says this: Darwin's theory of dead matter to life is a complete assumption and not even close to a scientific hypothesis. By the way, he took a lot of heat when he said that from a lot of academia.
And notice what he said, not a scientific hypothesis. That's what I mentioned a long time ago, early on. This thing, it doesn't even qualify as a hypothesis. Well, it qualifies as a hypothesis, but it's not been shown to be a hypothesis that works. Much less advance it advance it to theory, much less advance it to fact. Because that's true. Even today, they know there's not even a good hypothesis that it could work because it can't be tested.
Here's a quote from someone. I'm not going to name him, but I'm going to ask you if you know who this is. Often, a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may have not devoted myself to a fantasy. This person also referred to the theory of evolution as grievously hypothetical. He found it hard to believe that the eye evolved through natural selection with all of its complexities. He knew that the fossil record was a problem for the theory of evolution. Who am I talking about?
I'm not sure who that is right off, because I know that applies to a whole bunch that I know of. So.
It's Charles Darwin.
I was going to say Darwin, but it almost seemed like some of them were too early for him. I was going to say Darwin, but it almost seemed like it's too early. Yeah,
so he had doubts.
Yeah. The one that really gave it away to me was the eye, but he says, to suppose that an eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. And it's true. He had trouble all along the way with what he's coming up with, but his hope was that somewhere down the line somebody would come up with something. In fact, we again, our son got to see it, and I've shown pictures of it from other people, but it was really cool to get to see the pictures from our own son. But Darwin's first tree thinking idea, where he drew his first stick tree with, the evolution of everything all the way up to man type of thing. He didn't list everything out yet, but he drew that tree thinking idea that we all see. Right across the top, he says, "I think," and the whole thing is just, and it still is just, "I think." I think this happened. It's still just a belief. It's still just a thought, because there is no science for it. It still is a belief system. It's not fact. Again, what is religion? A set of beliefs about the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. Number one definition. That's what evolution is. It is a belief system. It is religion by definition. We try to teach our children Christianity. We just get a very broad, generic term there. But the same brain, the same mind cannot house two competing religions. It can't be done. It's going to struggle. Eventually, one's going to win out over the other. His whole tree thinking idea in the first place was thought. Every science textbook that especially biology that's dealing with this, and or a lot of times geology, where they show that kind of thing with the rock layers. In the chapter Evidence for Evolution, there's always a sub-chapter that says something about Darwin's thinking was drastically changed by the books he took, and so on and so forth. Ideas that shaped Darwin's thinking is in all of those books. And all that stuff, they do let us know it's a thought process, just like Darwin originally did when he drew that tree. But the problem is, then they go talk about it as a fact.
Well, what's the thought behind a tree? Because the tree itself...
simple life forms that didn't turn into more complex life forms. And
so if you follow the tree all the way down, from the top all the way down...
to just this ooze of some sort, this slime of some sort, there's some kind of
So the Darwin's tree of life represents what, about 4.8 billion years of life?
Yes.
Going down to one
single common ancestor of some sort. And a lot of times people will see the tree where they'll have, usually drawings, sometimes actual photos of some of it, but man will be on the top. Of course, man's got to be the best, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, then they'll come on down. There's the horse and the frog and various animals, all the way down to just some worm-looking, slimy, snake-looking thing, whatever, to this molecule-looking thing.
From the goo to the zoo to you.
Yeah. But when you look at the other branches, it goes off into grass and plants and bushes and trees. And, it's not just that we used to be monkeys. The idea, every living thing goes back to that same common ancestor. Well, that just is absolute preposterous. But the reason they do that is because there's this common chemical makeup. But there has to be, because there are only a certain number of elements anyway that everything's made of.
Is Darwin's tree of life, is it deceiving in the context of they make it seem like everything connects, but like I feel like if you look at Darwin's tree of life, there are missing links. They're just there. It doesn't all connect.
Right.
There's like a missing chain.
All over the place. Yeah, it depends on how detailed they are. Sometimes they'll show really detailed sections of that in various textbooks, and you can see it in there because there may be a bold black text for something that they think they found. A lot of times those aren't even complete. That's just a portion that they believe to be or whatever. But then there'll be little dashed lines or dotted lines, or they'll have some kind of, to set it off, some parentheses or something where they'll have just huge numbers of missing transitions that would have had to happen to go from here to there. Like, for instance, one of the things they say that dinosaurs evolved into birds, and they say T-Rex is a chicken. And I actually show science publications that one of them says there was no big bang when T-Rex turned into a chicken. It was a journey.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, seriously. I mean, people can believe that stuff. And so in those depictions like that on that tree, you'll have the T-Rex or the dinosaur drawing of a T-Rex or whatever, sometimes just a black silhouetted representation. And then all these dashed lines and then a chicken. Well, because somebody lined it up on a piece of paper that way doesn't mean that's what happened. There
was an article written in National Geographic. The name of the article was Darwin Wrong. And you're like, wow, maybe they thought Darwin. Of course, they support Darwin when you read the article. But this is a quote from that article. Illuminating, but spotty, the fossil record is like a film of evolution from which 999 of every 1,000 frames have been lost on the cutting room floor.
Right. That quote has been, it's several different versions of it. One of them says it's like watching a film from just a few scattered frames near the end. Because in their eyes, 20 billion years ago, Big Bang, and here we are today. We've got all this smarts and technology and all that. But yeah, so much of this is missing. You just fill in the blanks, fill in whatever you want to. And you can come up with all kinds of options, but there's no way to know if it's right or wrong. And so they teach it as though it's a fact and teach it as though it's right. But that's the problem. It's all missing. Yeah. The whole story is missing. They say there was a Big Bang. There's no evidence for. They say they have evidence, but it's interpretation of what they're looking at. They think they're seeing. And then they say this earth cools, and then they say this water shows up, and they say this lightning bolt hits this thing, and they say, and they can look and see that something they believe to have been that. But again, there's no way to call it science.
Now, some people say there are missing links, but then other people say, we're not just missing the links, we're missing the whole chain.
We're missing the whole chain, yes. Because that puts it in terminology that anybody can understand. And that's why even with our meetings, I try to keep it in terminology that everybody can understand, because it's so important that people understand that even the elite, the people that are the ones that are doing this stuff, they admit these kinds of things, that so much is missing that they have to fill in. Well, then how do they know they're filling it in right?
The last thing we're going to talk about is the fossil record. Okay, here's a quote by Charles Darwin. The number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on the earth must be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? He goes on. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this, perhaps, is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. So he had a problem with fossils when he was alive.
Right.
Because there was no evidence in the fossil record for his theory.
Right.
What did he say, though? He said, give it some time?
His hope was that in time somebody will find something. And it's actually gotten worse, because as much digging. In his day, all these big companies that make these tractors that we dig through Earth now all over the place big time. And so they still have not found things to justify or to prove or to show that Darwin was right. So, yeah, what he knew all along is still what is being found. And it's kind of like what I mentioned way quite some time ago in this interview, that if evolution is true, you shouldn't be able to scratch the surface of the earth anywhere without coming up with some kind of thing that tried to turn into something else and couldn't quite make it. And Darwin knew that kind of thing had to be there, and they're still not found.
Yeah, he said give it 150 years.
Yeah.
And then it's been 150 years, and you, like you said, we have evidence for the opposite. I like this quote: "Faith in evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links not seen."
That's good. I never heard of that one. That's good.
You can use it if you want to.
That's good
for your seminar.
Yeah, that's good.
I guess my last question to you then, Steve, is: I know we have to get into our children's lives. Sometimes we think that, we'll just let our kids go to school. And I'll just say this: I grew up in a Christian school, and the Christian school was affiliated with the church. It was a church school, and a lot of my friends, when they graduated, they took off. They just left, disengaged from Christianity. Yeah. And I feel like parents at that time, they allowed the school to do the parenting for them.
Exactly.
And when the school, because it was affiliated with the church, had some rules, and the kids didn't like the rules, right, instead of the parents saying, you know what, I don't want you to do this, and I don't want you to do that. That has nothing to do with the school. This is what I believe. Right. They said, oh, well, those are the school rules, and I'm sorry, we can't do anything about it. So then what ended up happening is my friends, they started to dislike the school.
Right.
Because of the rules and because of the things, and so they just disengaged. How important is it for our parents to be able to answer questions like this?
It is crucial, because the fact is, God set up the system he set up, and it is Christ, husband, wife, children. Mm-hmm. That's the order that God wants ideally. Children obey the parents, wife submits to the husband loves the wife, lives with her according to knowledge, often misunderstood, doesn't do that, and follows Christ. That is the God-blessed, God-ordained order. That daddy in that home is the spiritual umbrella in that home. And like it or not, good one or bad one, he's still that is who he is. And our children are given to us by God to bring up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That's not just a coffee cup saying. It means what it says. Talking about the ways of God, thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. Talk to them. Sit in the house, walking by the way, lying down and rising up. We're supposed to be getting involved in our children's lives. People don't even eat dinner together anymore as a family, much less when's the last time Daddy sat down in the kitchen table with the family and read the Bible to them.
Yeah.
I mean, we just don't do that, but we should. We need to. And the thing of it is, our children know instinctively. You don't have to tell a rooster he's a rooster. You don't have to tell a bull he's a bull. You don't have to tell the buck he's the buck. You don't have to tell a little boy he's a man. He's a leader. You don't have to tell the little girl she's the helpmeet. She's the follower. Box of toys, they've never seen them before. Little bitty kids. Girls gravitate to the Barbie dolls. Boys gravitate to the army men. There are things built in at creation that we can't do anything about. God built it in that way. When our children, even tiny, growing up, mommy is above me, so to speak. Daddy is in charge. They know that. Just like you don't have to tell the buck he's the buck. When we're not fulfilling the God-given roles that God has given us to fulfill, and the children are seeing it, it starts to set up confusion. When those children come to us with questions and we don't have those answers, it sets up confusion. When the books say, Mommy and Daddy aren't going to know this, the biblical theologians are wrong, creationism is wrong, that's the word they use. When the books are saying these things, the theologians are wrong, and they have asked the question to Mom and Dad don't have the answer, it confirms the book is right in their minds. And the problem is, we send them to school, even a Christian school, and we expect that everything's going to be the way we want it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but the bottom line is still, it's built in that Daddy's the head of this house, Mommy submits to Daddy, and not that Daddy's a beast, I don't mean that, but I'm saying that's the God-blessed order. And when our children are seeing something that is contrary and living something that is contrary to that, it starts to set up confusion. And then when you add all this other stuff that comes in, like the geologic column and people in the public systems, what they get, and the influence from their friends and their peers and all that, and we're not helping set straight at home It's a problem. And we've been on the road a long time, and we have seen so many families, just precious, beautiful little 8, 9, 10, 12-year-old children, just love God. They're just so happy about life and everything. And we go back to that church 6, 8 years later, and they're just gone. And it's sad. And it breaks the parents' heart because they thought they were doing the right thing. And I just want to encourage people, you got to get involved in your children's lives.
I think as parents, we have an absolute way to influence our children because we can bring them truth with relationship in the context of relationship, which means we can be influential in their lives. Some people will bring truth without relationship, and it's all right, but sometimes you don't trust it. Right. Some people have relationship without truth. Right. But as parents, we can do both. Right. We can bring truth with relationship, which can be very influential.
And in our society, that's just missing. If we get right down to it, it just is. And it shouldn't be. And sometimes we got to put ourselves down, put our flesh down and do the right thing with our children. Let me tell you one quick story. I'll make it as fast as I can, but kind of on the lines of this. Our son was, we call him motorhome school. We say he's a Rhodes Scholar. Yeah. his first meeting, he was like just months old, Yeah. And but we were at a camp meeting one time in Indiana, and Paul was probably 15. He was getting on up in there. Maybe even 16, whatever. And camp meetings are fun. Some of them are just, you know what they can be like sometimes. Yeah. It's just, you stay up all night and you just get up early in the morning and it is go. Well, we had been, it was one of those times, a few days had gone by and we're just kind of tired. Morning sessions were over, afternoons going on, and we're parked at the property there. And my wife and I are sitting in the motorhome, just kind of chilling, relaxing, been exhausting. And our son was outside, and Dana noticed that he was just kind of walking up and down, and he's on his phone, just doing whatever. And the kids are playing basketball and baseball, and he's just by himself walking. And my wife said, she looked at him and said, "Why don't you go throw the Frisbee with Paul?" Mm-hmm. And it's not a Frisbee, it's a ring, but we call it a Frisbee. Anyway, I said, I'm tired. I'm not sure. She said, come on, go throw the Frisbee with Paul. Look at it. I said, oh man, I don't know. Maybe later. She said, Steve, come on. Look at him. You really ought to go throw the Frisbee with Paul. Come on, what do you think? She wasn't demanding me to do it, but she was strongly suggesting I.
She felt something in her spirit.
Felt something there, And I looked at him. I said, "All right." I did not want to go out and throw that Frisbee. I honestly did not want to go, but I said, "You know what? I'm going to do it." So I go out, go to the car, get the Frisbee out. We keep it in there, and arrow ring. I think it's. I don't even know the name of it. Arrow ring. I think it's. You throw the thing a mile, man. Maybe not a mile, but it's straight. It's awesome. So I went out to Paul. I said, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" All right. And he's just in his own little world texting or whatever. And I said, "Hey, let's throw the Frisbee." He said, "Not now." I said, "Oh, come on, let's throw the Frisbee." Now I'm playing the part. My wife was doing it. And so he said, come on. We went back and forth about 4 or 5 times. So I'm just like, 4 feet away from him. I just tossed it, bumped him in the chest, "Dad, stop," And I said, "Come on, buddy, let's throw the Frisbee." I picked it up, tossed it at him again, stepped back a little, tossed it. And he said, "Oh, come on, quit. I'm busy right now. I don't really want to." And I said, "I know. I kind of don't either, but come on, let's throw the Frisbee." So bottom line is, we went through this thing. I stepped back about, 15 feet or so and tossed it and hit him. And he looked at me and he put his phone in his pocket. He grabbed that thing and tossed it back. And we started throwing it back and forth. We backing off. And we were a full, almost football field away from each other, throwing this thing. We had the absolute time of our life. And we still talk about it today. That event helped to put a bond with us that would not have been there had it not been. And oftentimes, simple things like that, that we can do with our children just to put a bond there a little bit. Not that we're perfect, not that we're holier than thou or anything, but just to reinforce that little bit of something, It was just the most awesome thing. I can't imagine not having done it. Yeah. And I didn't feel like it at the first part. And I'm just saying, daddies out there, we don't feel like doing some things sometimes, but you know what? We really, really need to say, no, I'm going to put my flesh down. I'm going to do what's right for the family or for the children or for the wife, or, whatever the case may be. And just make those little tweaks of correction and get involved in our families. It's just so crucial important.
All right, Steve, I just want to thank you for your time. I know you're busy. You're teaching a creation seminar here at CLC in Mequon. Why don't you tell my listeners how they can get a hold of you, your website, and the ministry's name?
Yes. A Creation Seminar is the ministry, and our website is creationseminar.net. I just can't stress enough. We got to get involved in our children's lives, but we need information, not just with this topic, but every topic. We can't just relegate every topic to somebody else. Yes, other people are more experts than I am on this or that or another thing, but we still can get involved in that. So we have materials on there that even fossils. You can open the door to conversation with fossils because they're just so awesome. They're just they're just amazing. We didn't get much into that, but we have a lot of information as far as just information, but we also have an order page there. We have we have 12 different lessons to the seminar series, but we also have things specifically for children, VBS things that we had filmed and school meetings we had filmed and those types of things. So we have a resource page there. We try to have information. If we can help anybody, our phone number's there, email's there too, and if I can help anybody, I'd be glad to. I love it. We just want to see people grow and become what God wants them to be.
Well, there you have it. Steve Grohman, thank you for your time once again. To my listeners, you know how to get a hold of him on his website and get that information so that you can share it. You can bring knowledge and information to your children in the context of a great relationship, and that's what we need to do to reach our children. I hope you learned something in this podcast episode. God bless and shalom, people.